You know, for most of my life, I thought death was simply the end. When the heart stopped beating, the story was over. Full stop. That was it. Nothing waiting on the other side. No hidden chapter. And honestly, that thought used to scare me a little. But one day, something happened that made me stop in my tracks. It was such a small moment, and yet it opened a door in my mind. I began to wonder, what if there really is more than just this life? And I know I'm not alone in that question. Maybe you've sat by a hospital bed, holding the hand of someone you love, and whispered to yourself, where do we go after this? Or maybe you've woken up in the middle of the night, thinking about someone you've lost, and felt that tug in your chest, like they were still close somehow. These are the kinds of questions we don't usually bring up at the dinner table, but deep down, every one of us has thought about them. So, in this video, I want to share some of those moments, my own experiences and stories from others that completely shifted the way I see life and death. I'll take you through dreams that felt more real than waking life, signs that showed up at just the right time, and experiences people have carried with them ever since. Whether you're a firm believer, a skeptic, or just someone who's curious, I think you'll find something here that makes you stop and think. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that life has a funny way of reminding us that it's bigger than we can imagine. So let's take this journey together. Who knows? You might just recognize something in these stories that makes you think back to a moment in your own life. A moment when you too felt that maybe, just maybe, there's something more. I'll never forget one night, not too long after I lost someone very dear to me. The house was quiet, so quiet you could almost hear the walls breathing. I finally drifted off to sleep, and in my dream, that person walked right into the room. They didn't say much, but they sat down beside me, just like they used to, and gently reached for my hand. The strangest thing is, I could feel it. The warmth, the pressure of their fingers wrapped around mine. It was so real, so alive, that when I woke up, I honestly expected to see them still sitting there. My eyes opened to an empty room, but the feeling in my hand, it lingered. It was as if part of that moment had crossed over from the dream into my waking life. Now, I know some people would say, oh, that's just the brain playing tricks, sorting through memories, and maybe that's true. But I'll tell you this, no ordinary dream leaves you with a sense of peace that lasts for days, even weeks. That moment felt like more than a dream. It felt like a visit, a reminder that love doesn't just disappear when someone leaves this world. And I've heard so many others share something similar. Friends who have lost a spouse or a parent will sometimes say, I saw them in a dream, and it was like they came back, just for a little while. Isn't it something how powerful that can be? Maybe these experiences are our soul's way of telling us that the bond we share with those we love doesn't stop at the grave. Maybe it's life's quiet way of saying, you are not alone. Have you ever had a dream like that? So real, so vivid, that you woke up convinced it was more than just imagination? If you have, I'd love for you to share your story in the comments. You never know who might find comfort in reading it. It's not just me who has felt something beyond this life. Over the years, I've listened to so many stories from people who, in their own quiet way, found signs that gave them comfort and maybe even proof that love continues on. Take Mr. Myth, for example. He's 70 now, and a few years back, he lost his wife after more than 4 decades together. The kind of love where you finish each other's sentences, where silence feels full because you know who's sitting beside you. After she passed, nights were the hardest. The house felt too still, too empty. Yet, he told me, every so often he would hear soft footsteps in the hallway. Not heavy, not frightening, just the familiar sound of his wife walking down the corridor the way she always used to. Some people might call it memory or imagination, but to him, it was a quiet reassurance. She was still there, keeping him company through the lonely hours. And then there's Mrs. Sue, 74, who lost her only son. She told me about a morning when she was standing in her kitchen, heart heavy because it was his birthday. She whispered a little happy birthday through her tears. And just then, a small white feather drifted down from nowhere, landing gently on the kitchen counter. She laughed and cried at the same time, saying that was his way of telling me he heard. Now, you could dismiss these things as coincidence, a creaking floorboard, a feather floating in the breeze. But I think we all know the difference between something random and something that feels like a message meant just for us. These little moments, these signs, bring peace. They remind us that the bond of love doesn't dissolve with death. And maybe that's the point. Life gives us these gentle whispers, not to scare us, but to let us know we are not alone. Have you ever had a moment like that, where you just knew it wasn't chance? If so, I'd love to hear your story, because your experience might be the very thing someone else needs to hold on to hope. There was another moment that really stayed with me. I was sitting alone one evening, the kind of night where the house is so quiet you can hear the clock ticking in the next room. I wasn't doing anything special, just sitting there, lost in thought. And suddenly, I felt it, this overwhelming sense that someone was standing right behind me. Not in a scary way, not like I was in danger, but in a way that made the hairs on my arms stand up. It felt familiar, almost comforting, like the quiet presence of someone I once knew. I turned around, of course, because what else do you do? And there was no one there. The room was empty, just the same as it had been all night. But here's the strange part. The feeling didn't go away. It lingered, almost like a gentle reminder that I wasn't truly alone. Now, science would probably tell us it's the mind playing tricks, that it's just the brain firing signals and stirring up old memories. And I don't dismiss science. I think it explains a lot. But sometimes, our hearts know things our brains can't measure. How do you explain that sense of presence, that undeniable comfort, when logic says there's nothing there? I think moments like that are seeds, tiny seeds of faith planted in us when we least expect it. they grow into the quiet belief that maybe, just maybe, there's something beyond the walls we can see, something bigger than us. Have you ever had that happen when you were alone but felt someone was right beside you? Maybe it was in your living room, or while you were driving, or even in a hospital waiting room. These experiences are hard to put into words, but they leave a mark. And sometimes that's all it takes. One quiet, unexplainable moment to remind us that love, connection, and spirit don't end with this life. Another place where this question of something more comes up is in near-death experiences. Over the years, countless people who were pronounced clinically dead for a few minutes or even longer have come back with stories that sound strikingly similar. They talk about being pulled through a tunnel, seeing a brilliant light that wasn't harsh but gentle, warm, and filled with love. Some describe loved ones waiting on the other side, smiling, reaching out, welcoming them home. One man I spoke with, 65 years old, told me about the time his heart stopped on the operating table. He remembers floating above his own body, watching the doctors and nurses work frantically. He could hear every word they said, even though his body wasn't responding. And then, just as suddenly, he was surrounded by light. He said it wasn't like any light he had ever seen. It was alive. It was love itself. When he came back, lying in that hospital bed, he said he wasn't the same man anymore. The fear of death that had followed him his whole life was simply gone. Now, skeptics will say these are just hallucinations, the brain shutting down, or chemical reactions firing off as the body fades. And maybe part of that is true. But here's the thing. People from all over the world, from different cultures, religions, and backgrounds keep describing the same experience. The light, the tunnel, the overwhelming sense of peace. Isn't it strange that so many people who've never met each other tell almost the exact same story? To me, that consistency is hard to ignore. At the very least, it tells us that the experience of dying may not be something to fear. And maybe, just maybe, it suggests that there's a continuation of love, of spirit, beyond what we can see. So I wonder, if people who have come so close to death return with stories of peace and light, should we really dismiss it as coincidence? Or is it life's way of offering us a glimpse of what's waiting beyond? Easy to listen to. Natural, like a professional storyteller. Not every reminder of something more comes in a dramatic vision or near-death moment. Sometimes it's hidden in the quiet corners of everyday life, ordinary moments that feel anything but ordinary. I remember one afternoon, sitting in my living room thinking about someone I had lost. Out of nowhere, a song came on the radio. The very song we used to sing together while driving in the car. It wasn't even a popular station I had on, just some background music. But there it was, playing at the exact moment I was missing them the most. I couldn't help but wonder, was that coincidence? Or was it a little hello sent from beyond? And I've heard stories like this from so many people. A woman once told me that after her mother passed, she would suddenly catch the smell of her mother's favorite perfume in the house. Not all the time. Natural, like a professional storyteller. Not too high, not too young, suitable for older people to listen for a long time without tiring their ears. Suitable for storytelling, audiobooks, clear flow, moderate speed for easy follow. Not all the time, not lingering, just enough to stop her in her tracks and bring tears to her eyes. The house was empty, windows closed, no reason for that scent to be there. But it was, and it felt like her mother was near. Or think about those moments when something should have gone terribly wrong, but didn't. Maybe you've had one of those close calls, a near accident in the car, a fall that should have been worse, and yet somehow you walked away unharmed. People often say, "I must have had a guardian angel that day." And maybe that's exactly what it was. You see, life has this way of speaking to us in small, quiet signals. A song, a scent, a narrow escape. They're not random, they're reminders. Reminders that love, spirit, and protection are still with us, even if we can't see them with our eyes. Have you ever experienced something like that? A sign so small it could be brushed off, but deep down you knew it meant something? If so, hold on to it. Those moments are gifts, and they can change the way we see the world. I'll be honest with you. I wasn't always someone who believed in the idea of life after death. For most of my life, I thought it was just something people told themselves to feel better when they lost someone. I used to say, when it's over, it's over. But then, little by little, life started showing me otherwise. Those moments we just talked about, the familiar song playing at just the right time, the sudden whiff of a scent I hadn't smelled in years, that feeling of being pulled out of harm's way in an instant. They weren't just coincidences to me anymore. They felt too personal, too precise, as if they were meant for me to notice. And here's what I've learned. I don't need to have all the answers. None of us do. Maybe we'll never fully understand what happens beyond this life. But what matters is being open to the possibility that there is something more, something greater than ourselves. And when I finally allowed myself to let go of the need to explain everything, that's when peace came. You know, I've talked to people who call it God. Others say it's the universe. Some simply call it love that never dies. Whatever name you choose, the truth is it gives us something we can't live without: hope. Hope that the people we've lost are never truly gone. Hope that we're not walking this life alone. Hope that even in our hardest days, there is a light beyond what we can see. And maybe that's the gift in all of this. Not certainty, but comfort. Not answers, but presence. A gentle reminder that love has a way of reaching us, across time, across distance, even across death. So let me ask you, Have you ever had a moment that made you stop and wonder if someone you love was still with you? You know, if you've ever had even the smallest feeling that there's something more than this life, I want you to hear me clearly. You're not alone. I used to think those kinds of thoughts were just people's imaginations, or maybe wishful thinking. But over time, as I went through my own experiences and heard the stories of others, I realized these moments are far more common than we think. Think about it. How many times have you felt something you couldn't explain? Maybe you dreamed of a loved one who passed, and it felt so real that you woke up with tears on your pillow. Or maybe you've been sitting quietly, and suddenly you felt their presence in the room with you. Those moments don't have to be frightening. In fact, I believe they're gifts, gentle reminders that love doesn't end just because life on this earth does. And here's the beautiful part. These experiences don't make us fear death. They do the opposite. They make us appreciate life even more. Suddenly, a morning cup of coffee tastes richer. A hug from a friend feels warmer, and time with family feels more precious. It's like the awareness that life is fragile makes us finally live it fully. So if you've had one of those experiences, I encourage you to hold on to it. Let it shape the way you see the world. Don't brush it off as just a dream or just my imagination. Sometimes those quiet whispers of the soul are telling us more truth than we realize. And now, I'd love to hear from you. What was the moment you knew there was more than just this life? Was it a dream, a sign, or maybe a simple feeling you couldn't shake? Share it with me down in the comments. I promise I'll read every single one, because your story might be the very thing that gives someone else the hope they've been searching for. You know, if there's one thing I've realized after hearing so many stories, and after living through my own, it's this. None of us truly know what happens after death. Scientists, philosophers, preachers, they've all tried to explain it. Some say it's a doorway. Some say it's just silence. But when you felt those moments of deep connection, like sensing a loved one's presence when they're gone, or dreaming a dream so vivid it feels like a visit, it's hard not to believe there's more. And maybe that's the real gift. These signs, these little glimpses, they don't just comfort us about what comes next. They make us love harder right now. They remind us to call that friend we've been meaning to call. To hold our grandkids a little longer. To say, I love you while we still can. Because if love doesn't die, then every bit of love we share today echoes forever. I don't pretend to have all the answers, and I won't tell you what to believe. But I will say this. The moment I knew there was more than this life was also the moment I stopped fearing the end. Because maybe, just maybe, there is no real end at all. Just a continuation of love, in a way our human minds can't yet understand. And that thought, it doesn't fill me with fear. It fills me with peace. Thank you for spending this time with me today. If you've ever had a moment where you felt there was something greater, something beyond this life, I'd love for you to share it in the comments. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear tonight.